Hello again, welcome back. Let's go to Nelson Mandela's birthplace, where the Mvezo Traditional Council has been hosting a special event. Joining us is his grandson and chief of the council, Mandla Mandela. And I believe you can hear me now. It's very good to have you with us. I would like to ask you about the arrest and the developments that we saw within the ANC today, as soon as we kicked off the program. What is your feeling when you hear something like that? What do you feel?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know of what the arrest's about and what has been the latest issues unfolding within Luthuli House. And I think I will not want to assert myself as a spokesperson of the African National Congress. There are better suited people such as Comrade Pule Mabi to be able to cover that. I will like to confine myself to my grandfather's centennial celebrations that we here in Madiba's birthplace have been celebrating today, joining hands with the rest of Africans and people from the global community, as assisted by Universal Peace Federation.
Tell us about the developments
of calling my grandfather. As you know, the day July 18 has been coined by the United Nations as an International Nelson Mandela Day because of my grandfather sacrificed 67 years of his life serving humanity. We were therefore called as the global citizens to dedicate 67 minutes of our time serving society and the communities we come from. Today, we did just that. We were able to hand out 200 blankets and winter hats that were donated by the Alimdad Foundation in honor of Masi Sulu. We gave 100 elderly women in the community, as well as in honor of Madiba, we gave 100 blankets and winter hats to elderly citizens, that being males. We also received 100 bicycles from the Tembekile Mzansi Foundation as well as the MTN Foundation, and chose beneficiaries of young learners from the Mandela School of Science and Technology, as well as the Makhatule Wanika Mandela Primary School, named after my father. We then proceeded to the Noseke Ninongapi Mandela Clinic, which was officially opened by His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, which it's a maternity clinic ensuring that the people in Mvezo can be able to receive primary health care. That was with the assistance of the Department of Health. We also received 5 houses from the Department of Human Settlements.
So a real day of giving, obviously a lot back to the community. You had former presidents there, current, and I'm just wondering who you believe possibly reflects your grandfather's values at the moment, and what needs to be done now to uphold his legacy?
I think because my grandfather belonged to a collective leadership of heroes and heroines from the South Africa in its entirety, both from the opposition and the ruling party. We have had leaders that have contributed immensely to make our country a better place. And for us as the family, as well as the Mvezo Traditional Council, we wanted to draw back to those leaders that have been able to work jointly with Madiba in paving our way to our democratic state. So we approached President F.W. de Klerk, President Mbeki, President Motlanthe, and President Zuma, as well as the current president, His Excellency President Ramaphosa. And I must say, with only an apology from President Mbeki, who had other prior commitments, these leaders were able to illustrate their own experiences and the lessons drawn from this global icon and father of our nascent democracy.
Let me ask
just
you,
the tribute paid by F.W. de Klerk had me in tears. Yeah. And the words uttered by him had me seeing the real pictures and the issues my grandfather was engaging with him during the transition period. Yes, go ahead, Jane.
Now, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, I mean, obviously, she's always thought of, or often thought of when you talk about Nelson Mandela. I mean, she died without resolving the Qunu housing issue there. I know that this is a day of forgiveness and moving on. I'm just wondering if this is something that can be put behind you as a family. I mean, where does this stand now?
Well, the matter was resolved, and it was regarded as Madiba's home, and we as a family have been able to welcome the decisions of the court. And those now that still feel they want to challenge this matter only have the Constitutional Court to turn to. But Madiba, under no circumstances, put this house in the favor of any wife or of any of his children. He has left the house of Qunu into the family estate, and the members of the family are able to come and still stay in the house and recollect and remember the experiences that we used to have with Madiba whenever we came home. And I do believe that that should be satisfactory to all the members of the family, so that we can be able for generations to come to utilize and regard Qunu as a home for the entire broader family.
Your grandfather, obviously, and I want to ask again about Winnie. I mean, he was so forgiving. He forgave when it came to apartheid, but he was unable to forgive her. What was behind that?
How is that? How do you draw that testimony that Madiba was unable to forgive her? What informs that decision?
Well, I mean, he seemed incapable of, if you look at how their relationship disintegrated towards the end, bringing up the estate again, for example.
Come again?
Talking about how the relationship disintegrated in the end, the frustrations and not seeing eye to eye over the estate, leaving it to the other side of his family.
Now, one's divorce and parting out of marriage should not be regarded as not forgiving. All marriages have their own challenges. And when two individuals that have been joined in union by marriage and decide to separate and go their different ways, it doesn't mean that there is any hatred in there and any reason to not forgive whatever the issues are. They have just been able to choose different paths and pursue their own paths. And Winnie wasn't the first and the only person that Madiba divorced. You would recall that Madiba's first wife was my grandmother, Evelyn Togomase, who divorced with my grandfather in 1956, went to lead her own way, her own life, and lived happily ever after. So I do believe that the two, my grandfather and Winnie, lived their life that had to come to an end, and they both decided to pursue different paths in life. And my grandfather's path was able to be blessed by a lovely woman, and he's confident, Mam Grasa, whom we in the family regard as Mam Nosizwe. And she was able to look after Madiba in his latter years and was able to give a dignified send-off and farewell after his passing. And that is what we want to remain as the family, upholding those wonderful memories and experiences that we have had. Madiba has had 3 wives in his lifetime, and all those wives have been learning experiences, have assisted to advance his understanding and his commitment to our people and the struggle for liberation, and made him continuously recommit himself to the freedom of our people.
Okay.
And that's what we as a family will continue to uphold.
Okay, Mandla Mandela, very good to talk to you. Enjoy the rest of the days, nights, celebrations. We continue our coverage of Madiba's Centenary celebrations. 3 former heads of state, as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke out on Madiba's legacy. ENCA's Aldrin Sampier has been tackling those comments, and he joins us now. Who do you think said it best?
I have to say that it is former President Kgalema Motlanthe, one of the presidents of the country who never became the president of the ANC. And quite interesting is the way that he managed to articulate what happened with the arrest or with the Rivonia trial, for instance, and leading up to Nelson Mandela's arrest, and how he was linked to the Rivonia trial and eventually becoming accused number 1. Because what I was expecting, listening to all of these speeches, I was expecting, you know, the personal anecdotes, people who would be speaking about how incredible a person he was, but these are the type of conversations that we had, and this is how we managed to discuss issues with each other. This is the type of advice that I got from the former president. But just take a listen to how Kgalema Motlanthe managed to capture the issue of Mandela's arrest and him being linked to the Rivonia trial, and the question that he poses right at the end.
So instead of finding the notes and destroying them, they instructed Arthur Goldreich, who was the main occupant of the main house on the farm, to find the notes and hide them. So Arthur Goldreich followed his instructions, found the notes, and hid them in the coal bunker at the back of the house. So during this raid, when the security police turned the place upside down, Madiba's notes were found in the coal bunker, in his own handwriting. And this is what linked him up with the Rivonia trialists. So they fetched him, serving his 5 years. Who knows? Had these notes been destroyed, probably our history would be different.
As you said, really learned something there,
yeah,
right?
Probably our history would be different. And in one of the packages that I'm putting together now, one of the questions that I actually ask is, what would South Africa's history have been if Nelson Mandela was not arrested, was not linked to the Rivonia trial, and did not spend 27 years in jail? Because part of the Mandela story is also the time that he spent in prison. And part of the campaign, the anti-apartheid campaign, was hashtag, well, back then there wasn't a hashtag, but it was Free Nelson Mandela, Free Madiba. And we know all across the world in different countries where people were protesting with those placards saying Free Mandela.
What an interesting thought. I mean,
Yep.
Nothing might have changed.
Yeah.
Talking of events and dramatic events, crowd pleasers, Cyril Ramaphosa, you would have thought that he'd be close and warm, and was he?
Yeah, well, I actually expected more from him, and this is the thing that I've always raised about Cyril Ramaphosa, is that he almost distances himself a lot of the times. Like when he was, I think it was Freedom Day as well. Remember that Ramaphosa played a critical role in the lead up to the elections that took place in April 27 in 1994. And at that time, on Freedom Day, his first speech as president of the country, I really expected him to be speaking about the moments leading up to the 27th of April. And You didn't get that. And this time around as well, another opportunity for him to speak about the legacy of President Nelson Mandela, but also his personal interaction, the personal anecdotes, and how difficult those negotiations may have been, and what he has learned personally from Nelson Mandela during those negotiations and those talks that were taking place. But just take a listen to this, and I think that he sums it up beautifully. And you were speaking to Mandla earlier on about the life of Nelson Mandela's former wife, Mamwini, and this is something that came out through and through after she had passed on. Just listen to how Cyril Ramaphosa sums it all up.
It turned him into a constant target of harassment, a fugitive, an absent husband, an absent father, and in the end, a treason trialist. But he was a prisoner of his own convictions and the principles that he subscribed to held him as their prisoner. He selflessly continued his work despite the risks and the hardships that accompanied this call that he had responded to.
And what about his predecessor? Slightly angry?
Yeah. Yes, he was really hard-hitting, and coming out and saying that Nelson Mandela did not sell out. And just take a listen as well, how he goes for those who are now claiming, as he says, Nelson Mandela as their own.
Even those who were and who are still fundamentally opposed to the ANC and who fought tooth and nail to keep South Africa's racist pariah state, now claim Nelson Mandela as their own. Such is the power of Nelson Mandela.
He certainly wasn't holding back there, was he?
Yeah.
And what about Thabo Mbeki?
Well, Thabo Mbeki, he wasn't at this event that was taking place in Mvezo, but he was at the Houghton home, which is, I understand, to be turned into a boutique or something like that. But just listen to what he says about being Nelson Mandela, living the legacy and acting out on this slogan about Mandela's legacy and living up to that legacy.
You know, after all of these years of democracy, our country still has all these major problems. And I think to be the legacy of Mandela must mean that we actually achieve actual movement forward. Just with regard to these matters that are in our constitution, about how to establish a non-racial and a non-sexist society. It's relatively easy to say those things, but to achieve them, as I think all of us have seen over the last 24 years, is not easy.
It's definitely not going to be easy. And the other thing about Nelson Mandela then, it was Nelson Mandela leading up to the process of freedom here in South Africa. But now that the ANC is actually in government 25 years later, how much have they been able to do to live up to the legacy and the expectation of Nelson Mandela?
As many say, the struggle continues, right?
Aluta continue.
Aldrin, thank you very much. Well, does Nelson Mandela deserve the praise he's getting? Next up, we discuss his legacy.